She had buried her father with these hands. Now she was supposed to bury her future with them, too. Ruth Ellen Hargrove stood in the blazing Texas sun, holding a letter that weighed almost nothing and meant almost everything. The paper was thin, cheap, the kind a man buys when he does not want to spend money on the message he is sending. She had read it 4 times already, and each time the words stayed the same, stubborn and unmovable as the cracked clay beneath her boots. 19 words. That was all Jonas Whitfield thought she was worth. Found someone here who fits better. Property yours if you want it. Do not expect more. And then his name, scratched at the bottom like an afterthought. Like she was an afterthought. The stagecoach had already pulled away behind her. She had heard it go, heard the driver click his tongue at the horses, heard the wheels creak and groan and fade into nothing. She had not turned around to watch it leave. She had kept her eyes forward on the thing Jonas Whitfield had called in his earlier letters a fine homestead with good bones and plenty of promise. It had bones, all right, mostly broken ones. 2 walls still stood. The roof had caved in on the left side, and what remained was warped and sun-bleached and looked like it might give up entirely if a strong wind came through. The front door hung crooked from a single hinge, swinging slow in the hot July breeze, too tired to do anything but surrender. The yard was cracked clay and dead grass and one stubborn cottonwood tree that looked about as miserable as she felt. Ruth Ellen stood there for a long moment, letting the heat press down on her shoulders like a physical weight. She was a big woman. She had always been a big woman. Broad through the shoulders, heavy through the middle, with thick arms and wide hips that she had spent 33 years trying to make smaller in the quiet corners of her mind. Her dress was dark blue cotton, already soaked through at the back and under her arms from 2 days of travel in July heat. Her dark hair had escaped its pins somewhere in Oklahoma Territory, and she had not bothered to fix it. She looked down at her hands. They were rough hands, calloused and scarred from years of helping her father in his carpentry shop back in Springfield. Not delicate hands, not pretty hands, not the hands of a woman men wrote poetry about. But they were capable hands. They knew how to hold a hammer. They knew how to drive a nail straight. They knew how to measure twice and cut once and build things that would stand when the weather turned mean. If you are new here, subscribe and follow Ruth Ellen's story all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what state you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. 1,500 miles from Springfield, Illinois. 3 different trains. 2 stagecoaches. 4 days of travel with nothing to eat but dried biscuits and nothing to drink but warm water from a canteen that tasted like copper. She had sold everything she owned to afford the fare. Her father's tools, most of them. The furniture from the house itself, what little it was worth after the debts were paid. Samuel Hargrove had not left his daughter much when he died 6 months ago. A lifetime of honest work as a carpenter, and what he had to show for it was a mortgaged house. A daughter who was too old and too large to attract a husband the traditional way, and a small wooden box that he made her promise not to open until she truly needed to. She had not opened it yet. She had carried it at the bottom of her bag for 6 months, and she had told herself it was just a sentimental keepsake. A final letter, maybe. Some words of advice for a daughter who had always been too stubborn to take advice when her father was alive to give it. She had not needed it yet. She had not wanted to need it. Her father's last words to her, spoken from his bed in the small room above the carpentry shop, had been simple. You were never built for small spaces, Ruth Ellen. Go find your room. She had not understood what he meant at the time. She had been too busy holding his hand and trying not to cry. But she thought she understood now, standing in front of this broken homestead in a state she had never seen before. He had known. Somehow, he had known she would end up here. Ruth Ellen folded the letter carefully, not because it deserved care, but because her hands needed something to do. She tucked it into her apron pocket, where it sat against her hip like a small, cold stone. Then she looked at the broken door. Then she looked at the yard. Then she looked at the cottonwood tree. "All right," she said out loud, to nobody. She did not know exactly what she meant by it, but she picked up her bag and walked forward. The first thing she did was walk the property line. Her father had taught her that. Before you touch a thing, he used to say, you walk it. You let it tell you what it needs. The property was not large. 40 steps north to south, 60 steps east to west. Enough land for a kitchen garden on the south side if she could get water to it. A dry creek bed 30 yards to the north that might run in spring. A listing fence post every 12 feet that she would need to reset before anything with legs decided to wander. The house itself was worse up close than it had looked from the road. The roof section that had caved in was completely gone, just open sky where protection should have been. The floor inside was covered with debris, dirt, and leaves and what looked like animal droppings, probably from a family of raccoons that had made the place home in the months since anyone had lived here. But the east wall was solid. She tested it with her palm, pressing hard, feeling for give. The timber was old, but it had not rotted. It would hold, and if the east wall would hold, then everything else was just work. She found a flat rock in the yard and dragged it to a spot of shade near the cottonwood tree. She sat down and ate the last of the dried biscuits she had brought from Oklahoma Territory. They were hard and tasteless, and they sat in her stomach like small stones. She thought about Jonas Whitfield. She had never met him. Their entire courtship, if you could call it that, had been conducted through letters. 14 letters over 7 months. He had described himself as a man of modest means but solid character, a landowner looking for a practical woman to help him build a life. He had described the homestead as needing some work but full of potential. He had described himself as 41 years old, in good health, ready to start a family. He had not described himself as a liar. But then again, liars rarely did. Ruth Ellen finished her biscuit and looked at the sun. It was maybe 3 hours from setting. Not enough time to do much, but enough time to walk into town and buy some supplies. Nails, mostly. Rope. Tar paper if the general store carried it. She stood up, dusted off her dress, and started walking east. The town was called Brenton, Texas. She had passed through it on the stagecoach, caught a few seconds of it through the dusty window. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a church with a crooked steeple. Maybe 200 souls if you counted generously. The walk took her most of an hour in the July heat. By the time she pushed open the door of Pemberton's general store, her feet ached and her face was red and she was breathing harder than she wanted to be. A small bell above the door announced her arrival. The man behind the counter was thin and narrow-faced, with spectacles pushed up on his nose and a measuring tape draped over his shoulder. He looked at her the way people always looked at her. That quick flick of the eyes up and down, that almost invisible flinch of surprise at her size, quickly smoothed over into something polite. "Help you, ma'am?" "I need nails," she said. "A pound of the 8-penny kind if you have them, and rope. Good rope. Not the kind that snaps. Tar paper if you carry it. He blinked at her. You building something? Fixing something? Fixing what, if you do not mind my asking? The homestead out west of town, the one that belonged to Jonas Whitfield. That changed his face. The polite smoothness cracked just slightly, and what came through underneath was something between pity and discomfort. He cleared his throat. You would be the mail-order bride, then, from Illinois. I would be Ruth Ellen Hargrove, she said, from Illinois. You have the nails or not? He had the nails. He did not say much while he wrapped them up, but as she was counting out her coins, she had $52 left to her name, and she was going to spend it like it was $500. The door opened behind her and 2 women came in. She heard them stop short. Lord in heaven, one of them murmured, low enough that she probably thought Ruth Ellen could not hear. That is her, is it not? The one Whitfield sent for. Poor thing, the other one said. And it was not kind. It was the kind of poor thing that meant what did she expect, coming all this way for a man she had never met, a woman her size at her age. Ruth Ellen set her coins on the counter, one at a time. She did not turn around. Do you carry tar paper? She asked the shopkeeper. Yes, ma'am, out back. I will take 2 rolls, but as she paid and gathered her supplies, she noticed something else. A young woman standing outside the store window, looking in. She wore a dress that was finer than anything else Ruth Ellen had seen in this town. Soft blue fabric with lace at the collar, the kind of dress that cost money. But her face did not match the dress. Her face was pale and drawn, and her eyes were sad, and she was looking at Ruth Ellen with an expression that was not pity and was not judgment, but was something else entirely. Something like recognition, something like hope. Then the woman turned and walked away quickly, disappearing around the corner before Ruth Ellen could get a good look at her face. Ruth Ellen gathered her supplies and walked out into the heat. She did not think much about the woman in the blue dress. She had too many other things to think about. She made 3 trips that first day. The first trip back from town, she carried the nails, the rope, a box of matches, and a jar of salt pork she had bought because she had not eaten a proper meal since yesterday morning, and her hands were starting to shake. She ate the salt pork, sitting on the flat rock in the yard, not because she was ashamed to be seen, but because there was nowhere else to sit. The second trip, she carried the tar paper and a hammer she had found hanging on a nail inside the one standing wall. It was not much of a hammer. The handle was cracked and wrapped with leather that was coming loose. But it was solid enough. She tested it against her palm and decided it would do. The third trip, she did not go to town at all. She walked the property line again, slower this time, looking at what needed to be done. The fence posts that needed resetting, the debris that needed clearing, the roof that needed rebuilding entirely on the west side. By the time the sun started to drop, she had pulled 12 boards off the collapsed roof section and stacked them in the yard. 4 of them were split beyond use. 8 of them were not. She set the split ones aside for kindling and started measuring the good ones with her handspan, trying to calculate what she had and what she needed. Her hands were bleeding before she figured it out. The boards had rough edges, and she had not thought to bring gloves, and by the 3rd or 4th one she had opened a cut across her right palm that kept reopening every time she gripped something. She wrapped it with a strip torn from her petticoat and kept going. She was trying to lever a beam back into position against the standing east wall when she heard hoofbeats. She did not stop. The beam was almost in position, balanced on a forked tree branch she was using as a prop, her full weight thrown against the low end. If she let up now, the beam would swing back and take half the remaining wall with it. That beam is going to fall on you, The voice came from somewhere above and to her left. Male voice, low and rough, the kind of voice that came from years of talking outdoors. She did not look up. Not if I hold it. Ma'am, that branch is not going to support the weight once you shift the fulcrum point. The angle is wrong. I know what the branch is going to do, she said through her teeth. If you are going to stand there, make yourself useful and get on the other end of this. A pause. Long enough that she thought he might just ride away and leave her to figure it out alone. Then she heard him dismount, heard boots hit the dirt, heard him walk around the side of the house to where the other end of the beam was sticking out over nothing. He got on the other end without another word. Between the two of them, the beam went up in under a minute. She told him where to hold it while she drove the nail through, and he held it, and she drove the nail. And when it was solid, she stepped back and looked at it. Good, she said. Then she turned around for the first time. He was tall, lean through the middle but wide through the chest, with a sun-darkened face and dark eyes that were watching her with an expression she could not immediately read. He had a battered hat and worn boots and the look of a man who had spent more time outdoors than in. He was maybe 38, maybe a year or two older. Hard to tell with men who had worked that kind of life. Ethan Calloway, he said. He touched the brim of his hat in a small gesture of courtesy. Ruth Ellen Hargrove. She did not offer her hand because it was wrapped in petticoat linen and bleeding through. This your land? No, ma'am. Ranch is 2 miles north. I was riding the fence line. He looked at the homestead behind her, then back at her. His expression shifted slightly. Still not readable, but different. You are the woman Jonas Whitfield sent for. I am the woman who is going to fix this roof before the next rain, she said. Jonas Whitfield can do whatever he likes. Something moved across his face. Not pity. She was braced for pity, had been braced for it since she stepped off the stagecoach. But this was not that. This was something more careful, something more considered. He sent you a letter, Ethan Calloway said. He did, and you came anyway. I had already paid my fare. She turned back toward the wall and picked up her hammer, and I did not have anywhere better to be. He did not leave right away. She expected him to. Men like that, men with horses and places to be, did not usually linger around a woman they had just met. Especially not a woman who was bleeding through her hand wrappings and talking back before she had caught her breath. But Ethan Calloway sat down on the low section of the collapsed fence rail and watched her work. And when she wrestled the next board up and could not reach the top bracket without standing on something, he stood up without being asked and held the board steady while she dragged over the flat rock from the yard to stand on. You know what you are doing? He asked. I am learning. That is an honest answer. I am an honest woman. She drove the nail 3 times, fast and hard. My father kept a carpentry shop in Illinois. I watched him build things my whole life. I never did it myself, but I watched. Watching and doing are not the same thing. No, she agreed. But watching is how you start. She hit the nail twice more. It set clean. She climbed down from the rock. Why are you still here, Mr. Calloway? He was quiet for a moment, looking at the wall she had just reinforced, then at the roof sections that still needed work, then back at her. Because you are bleeding through that hand, and you have got 6 more boards to hang, and it is going to be dark in 2 hours, he said finally. And because I know this property, and I know the roof on the south wall is worse than it looks, and if you do not brace the center beam before you work on that section, you are going to bring the whole thing down on yourself. She looked at the south wall, She looked at the center beam. She looked back at him. "Show me," she said. He showed her. Not by doing it himself. She noticed that quickly. He explained and pointed and let her put her hands on the wood herself. Let her decide where the nail went. Stepped in only to brace when the weight was too much for one person. He treated her like someone who was capable of learning and just had not had the information yet. It was such a simple thing. Such a stupidly simple thing. And she was almost undone by it. They worked until the light went fully golden and then started to go gray. By then, she had the south wall braced, 3 of the roof sections patched with tar paper, and a rough framework over what had once been the front doorway that would hold a canvas she did not have yet, but was going to buy tomorrow. Ethan Calloway packed up. He pulled a small kit from his saddlebag, tools she had not noticed before, and tucked them back into the leather. "You need water," he said. "There is a well on my property you can use until you clean out the one on the east side of the yard. It is probably just silted up, not dry, but you will not know until you dig it out. I do not want to put you out. You will not." She looked at him. The light was going fast now, and his face was half in shadow. "Why are you being kind to me?" He did not seem thrown by the question. He pulled on his riding gloves slow, smoothing each finger. "Because somebody ought to be," he said finally, "and because this land deserves better than what Whitfield left it." He mounted up. "The offer stands on the well," he said. "My ranch hand will be at the fence line at sunup. Name is Billy. He will walk you to it." Then he paused. He looked at the homestead, at the work she had done, at the tar paper on the roof catching the last of the evening light. "This land has bad history," he said. His voice was different now, quieter, weighted with something she could not name. The man who held it before Whitfield. He died under strange circumstances. His widow disappeared. Nobody asked questions because Whitfield's family owned half the county board back then. Ruth Ellen felt something cold move through her chest. "What was his name?" she asked. "The man who died." Ethan Calloway looked at her for a long moment. "Edward Hargrove," he said. "Why do you ask?" The name hit her like a physical blow. She felt her knees go soft, felt the world tilt slightly to the left, felt her grip tighten on the hammer she was still holding. Hargrove. That was her name. That was her father's name. That was the name on her birth certificate and her father's grave marker, and every document that proved she existed in this world. Edward Hargrove. Her father had never mentioned a brother, had never mentioned family in Texas, had never mentioned anything about this land or this town or any connection to a place 1,500 miles from the only home she had ever known. But Samuel Hargrove had left her a wooden box with instructions not to open it until she truly needed to. A box she had carried at the bottom of her bag for 6 months. A box she had told herself was just sentimental. "No reason," she said. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears, just curious. Ethan Calloway looked at her another moment. His eyes were sharp, the kind of eyes that saw more than people wanted them to see. But he did not push. He touched the brim of his hat again and rode north, and Ruth Ellen stood in the yard and watched him go and did not move until the hoofbeats had faded completely. Then she went inside the east room, the only room with 4 walls and most of a roof, and she sat down on the floor with her back against the wall, and she pulled the wooden box from the bottom of her bag and opened it with hands that would not stop shaking. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed and fragile at the creases. She opened it carefully, afraid it might crumble in her fingers. It was a map, hand-drawn, faded, but clear enough. a map of a property with boundary lines marked in careful ink. At the top, in handwriting she did not recognize, were the words Federal Homestead Grant, and below that, a name and a date. Edward Hargrove, 1859. Below the map was a letter, her father's handwriting this time, the cramped, careful letters she had grown up watching him form on receipts and invoices and the occasional birthday card. Ruth Ellen, if you are reading this, it means I am gone and you have found yourself at a crossroads. The land in Texas was your Uncle Edward's, my brother. He died in 1861. His wife Sarah wrote to me once, said she had lost everything, then she stopped writing. I never had the courage to find out what happened. I am sorry. If fate ever brings you there, find the truth. I owed him that. I owe you that. Your father, Samuel. Ruth Ellen sat in the near dark and read the letter 3 times. She had come to Texas to find a husband. She had found a broken homestead and a letter of rejection and a family she did not know existed. This land was not Jonas Whitfield's to give or take back. This land had belonged to her uncle. And now, somehow, impossibly, fate had brought her here to stand on it. She did not know what that meant yet. She did not know what any of it meant. But she knew one thing. She was not leaving. She woke before sunrise to the sound of something cracking. Ruth Ellen was on her feet before she was fully awake, heart hammering, one hand pressed to the wall for balance. She stood still in the gray pre-dawn light and listened. Another crack, smaller this time, coming from the direction of the south wall. She went outside barefoot, hair loose, not thinking about how she must look. The center beam she had braced the night before had shifted, not collapsed. The brace was holding, but one of the support nails had worked itself loose in the overnight temperature change, and the beam was canting left at an angle that was going to get worse before it got better. "All right," she said out loud. She went inside and got her hammer. She reset the nail in the gray light, working by touch more than sight, driving it slow and careful so she did not wake anything else loose. By the time the first color started to show on the eastern horizon, the beam was true again. She looked at her hands in the growing light. The cut on her right palm had opened again. Both palms were rough with new calluses building over old softness. 3 weeks ago, she had been in Springfield, Illinois, in the small room above her cousin Margaret's house, writing careful letters to a man she had never met. Her handwriting had been neat then, precise, the way the school teacher had taught her. She looked at her hands now. They were not neat. They were not precise. They were useful. That felt, in the gray light of a Texas summer morning, like a trade she could live with. She was still looking at them when she heard footsteps on the road. Not a horse, just boots, unhurried, coming from the north. She did not hide. She stood in the yard and watched the figure take shape out of the gray. He was young, maybe 20, with a red bandana around his neck, and a walk that said he had been awake since before the light, too. "You Ruth Ellen Hargrove?" he called when he was close enough not to have to shout. I am Billy. Mr. Calloway sent me." He stopped at the edge of the yard. He looked at the wall she had braced. He looked at the tar paper on the roof. He looked at her, standing barefoot in a work dress with her hair coming down and her hands wrapped in strips of torn petticoat. "You done all that since yesterday?" Most of it was yesterday. The center beam was just now. Billy looked at the beam. "That center beam shift on you?" It did. Happens on these old builds when the temperature drops overnight. Wood contracts different than the nails. He looked at it another moment. "You fixed it already." "I did." He was quiet a beat. Then he gave a small nod. the gesture of a man acknowledging work well done. "Well, whenever you are ready, ma'am, I will walk you to the well." Ruth Ellen looked at the homestead behind her, at the beam, at the tar paper, at the door frame she had reinforced yesterday before she even knew what any of this meant. "I am ready now," she said, and she followed him north. The well on Ethan Calloway's property was good and deep, with a solid crank and a clean bucket. She drew 3 pails before Billy stopped her. "Mr. Calloway said to give you the spare canteen and the carrying yoke," he said, "for hauling. That is generous. He figured you would say that." Billy held out the yoke, 2 buckets suspended from a wooden shoulder bar. She had seen women use them in illustrations, but had never tried one herself. She looked at it a moment, then took it, settled it across her shoulders, and adjusted the balance until the buckets hung even. "Your pa a farmer?" Billy asked. "Carpenter." "Figured." Billy watched her adjust the yoke with something that was not quite respect yet, but was moving in that direction. Most women from town would hold each bucket separate and spill half of it before they got to the road. Most women from town did not grow up hauling lumber, she said. She filled the buckets and walked back south without spilling a drop. She could feel the weight in her shoulders and lower back by the time she reached the homestead, a deep, grinding pull that she knew would be a sharp ache by nightfall. She did not slow down. She had 4 hours of good morning light before the July heat got serious, and she was not going to waste them. She was on the roof, or as close to it as she could get, balanced on a platform of stacked boards, when she heard the wagon. She did not look down right away. She was in the middle of driving a particularly stubborn nail that kept turning sideways in the soft wood, and if she lost her rhythm, she would lose the nail entirely. She only had so many. She drove it 3 more times, felt it set, then straightened up and looked. The wagon had stopped at the edge of the yard. 2 women sat on the bench. One was heavy-set, late 40s, with a face that was working hard to be pleasant. The other was thin and sharp-faced, and not working nearly as hard. "Miss Hargrove," the heavier one called up. "That is correct, is it not?" "That is me. We are from the Ladies' Aid Society. I am Cordelia Hatch. This is Vera Odom. We have brought you some things." She gestured to the wagon bed, which had a covered basket and what looked like a folded quilt. "Welcoming supplies, we call them. For newcomers." Ruth Ellen climbed down from her platform. She wiped her hands on her dress and walked to the wagon. "That is kind of you," she said. "Do not mention it." Cordelia Hatch climbed down with the ease of a woman who had done it 10,000 times and handed Ruth Ellen the basket. Cornbread, a crock of beans, dried apple slices, nothing fancy. "It is plenty," Ruth Ellen said. "Thank you." Vera Odom had not climbed down. She was looking at the roof section with the tar paper, at the braced south wall, at the carrying yoke propped against the fence post. Her expression was the particular kind that people thought looked like concern, but was actually just judgment wearing concern's clothing. "You have been busy," Vera said. "I have." "All by yourself?" Ruth Ellen looked up at her. "Mostly. Ethan Calloway was here yesterday evening." Vera's expression shifted slightly. "Ethan Calloway," she repeated. "Just him? Just him." Vera smiled. It was the kind of smile that had teeth in it. "I only mention it because this is a small town, Miss Hargrove. People notice things. People can notice whatever they like," Ruth Ellen said. "I notice I have got 3 more roof sections to tar before the afternoon heat. So if you will excuse me." She turned toward her platform, but Cordelia Hatch did not get back in the wagon. She stood there, watching Ruth Ellen with an expression that was different from Vera's. Softer, more considering. You need anything from town, Miss Hargrove. You come find me. I am at the millinery most mornings. I appreciate that, Mrs. Hatch. Cordelia. The woman's voice was firm but not unkind. Half this town owes Whitfield money or favors. The other half is just scared. But some of us remember what happened to Edward Hargrove. Ruth Ellen went still. You knew him? My uncle? Cordelia's eyes widened slightly. Then she looked at Ruth Ellen again. Really looked. The way someone looks when they are seeing a person for the first time. Your uncle, she repeated quietly. Lord have mercy. I did not know Samuel had a daughter. You knew my father? I knew of him. Sarah wrote to him once after Edward died, asked him for help. Cordelia's voice dropped lower. None of us knew what happened after that. She just disappeared one night. Whitfield's people said she signed over the land and left. But some of us never believed that. Ruth Ellen felt the world shift beneath her feet again. The same way it had shifted last night when Ethan Calloway said Edward Hargrove's name. What do you think happened to her? Ruth Ellen asked. Cordelia looked at Vera, who was watching from the wagon with an expression that suggested she was hearing more than she wanted to hear. I think she ran, Cordelia said carefully, and I think there is a reason Whitfield's family never wanted anyone asking questions about it. She climbed back onto the wagon. You be careful, Miss Hargrove. You are stirring up things that have been settled for 20 years. Not everyone is going to like that. I did not come here to be liked, Ruth Ellen said. I came here to find the truth. Cordelia looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was not Vera's kind of smile. It was something warmer, something almost proud. Your uncle used to say something like that, she said. He was a stubborn man, too. Stubborn enough to build a homestead on land that nobody else wanted. Stubborn enough to stand up to people who did not want him here. She clicked to the horse. Be careful, she said again, but do not stop. The wagon pulled away. Ruth Ellen stood in the yard and watched it go, and she thought about everything Cordelia Hatch had just told her. Sarah, her aunt, a woman she had never known existed until yesterday. A woman who had written to Ruth Ellen's father for help. A woman who had disappeared one night and never been heard from again. And Jonas Whitfield, who owned this land now. Who had brought Ruth Ellen here to be his wife. Who had rejected her with 19 words and offered her the property like it was his to give. Property that had never been his at all. Ruth Ellen went back to work. She tarred the remaining roof sections. She reset 2 more fence posts. She cleared debris from the east room until she could see the floor. And all the while, she thought about what she was going to do next. She was sitting on the flat rock in the cooling evening, eating cold beans from the crock Cordelia had brought, when she heard the horse again. This time she knew the sound. A big roan with a slightly uneven rear stride. Ethan Calloway. He dismounted at the edge of the yard and walked toward her. He looked at the work she had done, at the roof, at the fence posts, at the east room with its cleared floor. His expression did something complicated. You have been busy, he said. I have. He sat down on the low section of fence rail, the same place he had sat yesterday. I heard something in town, he said, about who you are. Ruth Ellen set down the crock of beans. And what did you hear? That you are Edward Hargrove's niece, that your father was his brother. She looked at him steadily. That is true. You did not tell me that yesterday. I did not know yesterday. She pulled her father's letter from her apron pocket. Not until I read this. Ethan Calloway read the letter in the fading light. His face changed as he read, going from careful to something harder and darker. Your father knew, he said when he finished. He knew something was wrong with how his brother died. He suspected. He never found out for certain. Ethan handed the letter back. "There is a lawyer in town," he said. "Theodore Marsh. Young man, sharp, does not belong to anyone. He has been trying to find a reason to look into the Whitfield land claims for years. Why? Because his father was the one who wrote up the original transfer documents, the ones that gave the Hargrove land to Whitfield." Ethan's voice was flat. His father died 2 years ago. On his deathbed, he told Theodore something was wrong with those documents, but he did not live long enough to say what. Ruth Ellen felt the cold move through her again. "You think the transfer was forged?" "I think your Aunt Sarah never signed anything," Ethan Calloway said. "I think Whitfield's father took that land the same way he took everything else, by force and by fraud." He stood up. "Theodore Marsh's office is on the east end of the main street," he said. "Go see him tomorrow. Bring your father's letter. Bring anything else you have." He mounted up. The light was almost gone now, just a thin line of gold on the western horizon. "Mr. Calloway." He paused. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Really?" He was quiet for a moment, silhouetted against the fading sky. "My sister married a man like Whitfield once," he said finally. "She did not survive it." He did not say anything else. He did not need to. He rode north. Ruth Ellen sat on the flat rock until the stars came out, and she did not move, and she did not cry, and she thought about everything that had happened in the last 2 days. She had come here to start a new life. She had found an old life instead. A family she did not know she had. A truth that had been buried for 20 years. Tomorrow she would go see Theodore Marsh. Tomorrow she would start asking the questions nobody wanted asked. But tonight she sat in the dark and looked at the homestead she had already started to rebuild, and she let herself feel, just for a moment, the weight of everything she had found. That night, Ruth Ellen could not sleep. She lay on the floor of the east room, on a bedroll she had made from the quilt Cordelia brought, and her own travel blanket, and she stared at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of the Texas night. Crickets, owls, the occasional rustle of something small moving through the dead grass outside. She thought about her father. Samuel Hargrove had been a quiet man, a man who spoke more with his hands than with his words, a man who had taught her everything she knew about building and fixing and making things that lasted. He had never talked about his past, never talked about family. When she asked, as children do, where their grandparents were, where their aunts and uncles were, he had always said the same thing. "They are gone, Ruth Ellen. It is just us now." She had accepted that. Children accept what they are told, especially when they love the person telling them. But he had known. All along, he had known. His brother was dead. His brother's wife had asked for help and then disappeared. And Samuel Hargrove had kept that secret for 20 years, too afraid or too ashamed to find out what had happened. "I am sorry," his letter said. "If fate ever brings you there, find the truth." Fate had not brought her here. Jonas Whitfield had, a man who held land that was never his, who had brought Ruth Ellen here under false pretenses, who had rejected her with 19 words. Had he known who she was? Had he known that the woman he was sending for was the niece of the man his family had cheated? She did not think so. Jonas Whitfield had not seemed like a man with secrets in his letters. He had seemed like a man who believed his own lies so completely that they had stopped feeling like lies at all. But that did not make it better. That made it worse. Ruth Ellen gave up on sleep sometime around midnight. She sat up and pulled her father's letter from her pocket and read it again by the thin light of the stars coming through the window she had not yet covered. His wife Sarah wrote to me once, said she had lost everything. Then she stopped writing. Sarah, her aunt. A woman who had married Edward Hargrove, who had built a life with him on this land, who had watched him die under strange circumstances and then vanished into the night. Where had she gone? What had happened to her? Ruth Ellen did not know, but she was going to find out. She met Theodore Marsh the next morning. His office was exactly where Ethan had said it would be, on the east end of the main street, in a small building that looked like it had been a feed store in a previous life. The sign above the door was hand-painted and slightly crooked. Theodore Marsh, attorney at law. She pushed open the door without knocking. He was not what she expected. She had imagined someone older, someone gray-haired and formal. Instead, he was young, maybe 30, with ink stains on his fingers and a desk that was buried under piles of paper and books and what looked like county records going back decades. He looked up when she came in. His eyes were sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Miss Hargrove," he said. He did not seem surprised to see her. "I have been expecting you. Word travels fast. In a town this size, everything travels fast." He stood and gestured to a chair that was only slightly less buried than the desk. "Please, sit." She sat. She pulled her father's letter from her pocket and handed it to him without preamble. Theodore Marsh read it slowly, his lips moving slightly. When he finished, he set it down on the desk and looked at her. "You are Edward Hargrove's niece," he said. "I am, and you did not know this when you came here. I did not know any of it until 2 days ago." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the letter, then at her, then at the stacks of paper on his desk. "My father was the lawyer who handled the property transfer in 1862, he said finally. "The document that gave the Hargrove land to Jonas Whitfield's father." "I know. Ethan Calloway told me." Theodore nodded slowly. "My father was not a good man, Miss Hargrove. He did things for the Whitfield family that he should not have done. He kept secrets that he should not have kept." He paused. "On his deathbed, he told me something. He said the transfer document was not legitimate. He said Sarah Hargrove never signed it. He said the signature was forged." Ruth Ellen felt her heart beating hard in her chest. "Can you prove it?" Theodore stood and went to a filing cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a folder thick with papers and brought it back to the desk. "I have been trying to prove it for 2 years, he said, "since my father died. But the original transfer document is in Jonas Whitfield's possession. He has never let anyone examine it." He opened the folder. "But I have something else. I have copies of other documents Sarah Hargrove signed. Letters to the land office, a deed registration from 1859. He spread them out on the desk. "Look at the signature," he said. Ruth Ellen looked. On every document, the signature was the same. 3 words, written in a clear, careful hand. Sarah Ellen Hargrove. "Now look at this." Theodore pulled out another paper. A copy, faded and hard to read, but clear enough. At the bottom was a signature. Sarah Hargrove. 2 words, Ruth Ellen said slowly. "Not 3. Theodore nodded. "Every verified document from Sarah Hargrove uses her full name. Sarah Ellen Hargrove. Every single one. She never signed anything without her middle name." He tapped the copy. "This transfer document uses only 2 words. Sarah Hargrove. It does not match." "The signature is forged," Ruth Ellen said. "I believe so. But believing is not the same as proving." Theodore sat back in his chair. To prove it, I would need the original document, the one Jonas Whitfield keeps in his desk. Ruth Ellen thought about everything she had learned in the last 2 days. About her Uncle Edward, who had died under strange circumstances. About her Aunt Sarah, who had disappeared into the night. About Jonas Whitfield, who had brought Ruth Ellen here to be his wife, and then rejected her with 19 words. She thought about the property she was rebuilding, the walls she was bracing, the roof she was patching, the land that had belonged to her family before she was even born. What would happen, she asked slowly, if you had the original document? Theodore Marsh looked at her. His expression was very serious. If I had the original document, he said, and if the signature could be proven to be forged, then the entire chain of title would be invalidated. The land would revert to federal homestead status, and you, as the closest living relative of Edward Hargrove and a resident who has already begun making improvements on the property, would have a strong claim to file for ownership under the Homestead Act. He leaned forward. But getting that document is impossible. Jonas Whitfield keeps it in his private study. No one goes in there except him. Ruth Ellen thought about the woman she had seen outside the general store. The woman in the fine blue dress with the sad eyes. The woman who had looked at Ruth Ellen with something like recognition. Maybe, she said. Maybe not. She was walking back to the homestead that afternoon when she passed the town cemetery. It was a small place, just a few dozen headstones behind a low iron fence, most of them weathered and listing from years of Texas wind. She had not planned to stop. She had too much work waiting for her. But something made her pause. A man was standing alone among the graves. A big man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of weathered face that comes from years of working outdoors. He was standing in front of a simple headstone, his hat in his hands, his head bowed. Ruth Ellen recognized him. Roy Creighton, Jonas Whitfield's enforcer. The man Cordelia had mentioned in passing. The man who had worked for the Whitfield family for over 20 years. He did not see her. He was too focused on the grave in front of him, and his face was twisted with something she had not expected to see on a man like him. Grief, and something else underneath it. Shame, maybe, or regret. She did not approach. She kept walking, keeping her footsteps quiet. But she filed the image away in her mind, the way she filed away everything she learned about this town and its secrets. Later that evening, she asked Cordelia about it. Cordelia had come by with more food, claiming she had made too much for herself, though Ruth Ellen suspected the truth was simpler than that. Some people showed kindness with words. Cordelia Hatch showed it with cornbread and information. Roy's wife is buried there, Cordelia said quietly. They were sitting on the flat rock together, watching the sun go down. Martha. She died about 8 years ago. Consumption, the doctor said. But some of us thought it was more than that. What do you mean? Cordelia was quiet for a moment. Martha Creighton was a good woman, she said finally. Kind, gentle, but she knew what her husband did for the Whitfields. She knew about the things he had been part of over the years. The intimidation, the threats, the people who were driven out of the county because they would not sell or would not keep quiet. She paused. Some people said she died of shame, that she could not live with what Roy had become. Their daughter ran off to California about 10 years ago and never came back. Never wrote. Never visited. Ruth Ellen thought about the man she had seen in the cemetery, the grief on his face, the way he had stood there with his hat in his hands, looking down at his wife's grave. He looked like a man carrying something heavy, she said. He has been carrying it for 20 years, Cordelia said. The question is whether he will ever put it down. The next 2 days passed in a blur of work. Ruth Ellen fixed the west room. She cleared the debris, patched the holes in the walls, reinforced the floor where it had gone soft from water damage. She hung a canvas over the window opening because she could not afford glass yet. She dug out the well on the east side of the property. It took her most of a day, waist deep in mud and silt, pulling up buckets of muck and hauling them to the edge of the yard. By the time she hit clean water at the bottom, her arms ached so badly she could barely lift the final bucket. But when the water came through clear and cold and good, she sat on the edge of the well and felt something she had not expected to feel. Joy. It surprised her. She had not thought she was capable of joy. Not here, not now. Not in the middle of everything that was happening. But there it was, small and bright and real. The satisfaction of work completed. The simple pleasure of building something that would last. She understood in that moment why her father had spent his whole life working with his hands. It was not about the money. It was not about the recognition. It was about the feeling of making something where there had been nothing before. Ethan Calloway came every evening. He did not ask to come. He did not explain why he was there. He simply appeared at the edge of the yard around the time the light started to go golden, and he helped with whatever needed 2 sets of hands, and they worked in companionable silence until it was too dark to see. On the 4th evening, they sat on the flat rock together after the work was done. "You are making good progress," Ethan said. "I am trying." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the homestead in the fading light. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Really? You could go back to Illinois. You could walk away from all of it. Find somewhere easier to start over." Ruth Ellen thought about the question. She had been thinking about it for days, turning it over in her mind, the way she turned over problems with the construction. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go," she said finally. "That was true when I got off the stagecoach. It is not true anymore." She looked at the walls she had braced, the roof she had patched, the well she had cleaned. "I am staying because this is mine," she said. "Because I built it. Because somebody named Edward Hargrove got cheated out of it, and his wife Sarah got cheated out of it. And I am not going to let that happen a 3rd time." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "When did you stop being afraid?" he asked. Not challenging, genuinely wanting to know. She thought about it. "I did not stop," she said. "I just stopped letting it drive." On the 5th day, Lucinda Whitfield came. Ruth Ellen was clearing the last of the debris from the west room when she heard footsteps. Not hoofbeats, not wagon wheels, just footsteps, light and hesitant, coming from the direction of the road. She set down the broken board she had been carrying and walked outside. The woman from the general store was standing at the edge of the yard. She was wearing the same fine blue dress, but it looked different now. The lace at the collar was torn in a place Ruth Ellen had not noticed before. The hem was dusty, and her face, which had been sad before, was now something closer to afraid. "You are Ruth Ellen Hargrove," the woman said. "I am. I heard about you, about who you really are, about your uncle." Ruth Ellen did not move. "And who are you?" The woman took a breath. She looked around, as if checking to make sure no one else was watching. Then she looked back at Ruth Ellen. "My name is Lucinda Whitfield," she said. "I am Jonas Whitfield's wife." The silence stretched between them. Ruth Ellen looked at this woman, this young woman who could not have been more than 24 or 25, who was married to the man who had rejected Ruth Ellen and who had stolen her family's land. She did not know what to say. She did not know what to feel. "I know what you must think of me," Lucinda said. Her voice was low, rushed, like she was trying to get the words out before she lost her courage. But I am not here to defend him. I am here because I know things. Things that could help you. What kind of things? Lucinda looked around again. Her hands were clasped in front of her, the way people clasp their hands when they are trying to keep them from shaking. He keeps documents in his desk, she said. In the bottom drawer. There is a false back. He thinks no one knows about it, but I found it months ago. I was looking for something else, and I found the hidden space, and I saw what was inside. Ruth Ellen felt her heart beating hard again. What did you see? Papers. Old papers. One of them looked like a land transfer document. The signature at the bottom did not look right to me. It looked different from other signatures I had seen from the same person. She swallowed. I did not know what it meant at the time. I did not know who Sarah Hargrove was, but I remembered it. And when I heard about you, about who you are, I started to understand. Ruth Ellen looked at this woman, at her fine dress and her torn lace and her frightened eyes. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Why would you help me against your own husband? Lucinda was quiet for a moment. Her hands tightened against each other. Because I have been looking for a way out for 2 years, she said finally. And I think you might be it. She looked at Ruth Ellen directly. He is not a good man, Miss Hargrove. Jonas. He seemed good when I married him. Charming, generous. But that was before. Before I saw what he is really like when the doors are closed. Her voice went very quiet. He does not hurt me. Not with his fists. But there are other ways to hurt a person. Ways that do not leave marks anyone can see. Ruth Ellen felt something shift in her chest. Something that was not quite sympathy, but was close to it. I am sorry, she said. Do not be sorry. Lucinda's voice hardened slightly. Help me. Help me find a way out. Help me find proof of what his family did to yours. If we can prove the land transfer was forged, if we can prove his father committed fraud, then everything Jonas has built on that foundation comes crashing down. She paused. And I walk away free. Ruth Ellen looked at her for a long moment. This woman who was offering to betray her husband. This woman who was asking for help and offering help at the same time. Can you get the documents? Ruth Ellen asked. Lucinda nodded slowly. Jonas is going to Abilene on business. He leaves tomorrow morning. He will be gone until Thursday. She looked at the homestead behind Ruth Ellen. Can you keep building until then? Can you keep this place standing until I bring you what you need? Ruth Ellen thought about the roof she had patched, the walls she had braced, the floor she had cleared. I can keep building, she said. I have been keeping things standing my whole life. Lucinda almost smiled. It was a small, fragile thing. I will come back, she said. Thursday night, after dark, after he falls asleep. And if he catches you? Lucinda's face went still. Then I am no worse off than I am now, she said, because I am already living in a prison. The only difference is whether the walls are visible. She turned and walked away. Ruth Ellen watched her go, a small figure in a fine blue dress, walking down a dusty road toward a house that was not a home. She thought about what it meant, an alliance with Jonas Whitfield's wife, a plan to steal documents from his private study, a chance to prove what Ruth Ellen already knew in her gut was true. It was dangerous. It was risky. It could go wrong in 100 different ways, but it was also the only chance she had. She went back inside and picked up the broken board and carried it to the pile of kindling. She had 3 days until Thursday. 3 days to keep building. 3 days to keep this place standing. She was going to use every hour of them. On the 6th day, more people came. Cordelia Hatch arrived in the morning with 2 other women. Ruth Ellen heard the wagon before she saw it. She climbed down from the roof where she had been patching a stubborn leak and walked to the edge of the yard. Cordelia was driving, but in the wagon bed sat 2 other women. One was heavy-set, with strong arms and calloused hands. The other was thin and wiry, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Ruth Ellen Hargrove, Cordelia called out. These are Agnes and Martha Brennan, sisters, widows, and the best repair women in the county. Agnes and Martha climbed down from the wagon without ceremony. Agnes was carrying a toolbox. Martha was carrying a basket of food. "We heard what you were doing," Agnes said. Her voice was gruff but not unkind. "We came to help. I cannot pay you." "Did not ask for payment," Martha said. She set the basket on the flat rock. "We asked what we could do. There is a difference." They stayed for 4 hours. Agnes fixed the cook stove that Ruth Ellen had given up on. She did something with the flue that Ruth Ellen did not understand, and suddenly the draft was working and the smoke went up instead of out. Martha rehung the front door on new hinges she had brought herself. The door swung smooth and true, closing with a solid click instead of the crooked swinging Ruth Ellen had gotten used to. When they left, the homestead felt different. More solid, more permanent, more like a place someone could actually live in. "Thank you," Ruth Ellen said. Cordelia looked at her from the wagon. "We have been waiting 20 years for someone to stand up to Jonas Whitfield," she said. "We are not going to let you do it alone." On the 7th evening, the storm came. Ruth Ellen felt it first. The way you feel things that matter. Not with your eyes, but with your skin and your ears, and the particular stillness of the air. The cottonwood tree went completely still. The birds stopped singing. The sky in the west went from gold to gray to something darker. She was on the roof when the first drops fell. She got down fast and covered her materials with a canvas. She was tying the last corner when the sky opened up. She made it inside before the worst of it hit. Then she stood in the east room and listened to the storm tear at the world outside. She knew without looking that the south wall corner was taking the worst of it. The corner she had braced, but not finished. The corner with the center beam that Ethan had warned her about on that first day. She could hear it. The groan and flecks of boards doing more work than they should have to. The creak of something working toward its limit. She went out anyway. The rain was warm and came sideways. It soaked through her dress in seconds. She did not care. She got to the south wall corner and put her hands on the post and felt what the storm was doing to it. The beam was shifting, twisting under the wind pressure. If she did not brace it in the next 10 minutes, she was going to lose the whole section. She needed lumber. She had 2 boards left in the materials pile. She was fighting the wind for them when she heard the horse. Ethan Calloway came through the storm at a speed that was reckless. He was off the horse and at her side before she had fully registered he was there. "South corner," she shouted over the wind. "I see it." He took one end of the board without being asked. "You got the prop brace under the canvas?" Left side. They fought the storm together for 20 minutes. It was the hardest physical thing Ruth Ellen had done in her life. The wind kept taking what she was trying to hold. The rain made every surface slick. Her arms burned with the effort of keeping the brace steady while Ethan drove the support nail. She fell once, slipped on the wet clay, and went down hard on her left knee. Felt the impact ring up through her whole body. She got up before Ethan could reach for her, and she said nothing, And he said nothing, and they kept going. When the brace was in and solid, she pressed her back against the wall and breathed. Ethan stood 3 feet away, soaked through, looking at the corner post. "It will hold," he said. "I know." They stood there in the rain, both of them breathing hard, both of them dripping, and Ruth Ellen felt something she did not have words for. A connection, a partnership, something that had been built over days of work and silence and shared purpose. "Ethan," she said. It was the first time she had used his first name. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said, "for coming, for all of it." He held her gaze. "You would have managed," he said. "You always do." Then he reached out and touched her arm, just briefly, just a moment of contact. "But you did not have to manage alone." They went inside and waited for the storm to pass. They did not talk much. They did not need to. Some things were understood without words. When the rain finally stopped, sometime after midnight, Ruth Ellen heard a knock at the door. She opened it. Lucinda Whitfield stood on the threshold. Her dress was soaked through. Her hair had come down, and in her arms, pressed against her chest, she held a bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth. "Jonas came back early," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "He came back 2 hours ago. I waited until he fell asleep, and I took them." She held out the bundle. Everything he had in that drawer. The transfer document, the original, and something else I did not expect to find. Ruth Ellen took the bundle. She unwrapped the oilcloth carefully. The transfer document was there. Old, yellowed, fragile at the folds. At the bottom, a signature in faded ink. Sarah Hargrove. 2 words. But beneath it was another paper. A letter. The handwriting was small and cramped, written in haste. Ruth Ellen read it, and her hands started to shake. "Samuel, they are going to take everything. Whitfield's men came last night. They said if I do not sign, I will end up like Edward. I am going to run. My cousin Martha in Missouri said she would take me in if I ever needed. I am not going to sign. Tell your daughter someday, if you can. Tell her the land was always meant for a Hargrove. Your sister by marriage, Sarah Ellen Hargrove." Ruth Ellen looked up from the letter. "She knew," she said quietly. "My Aunt Sarah. She knew about me. She mentioned me in this letter." Lucinda nodded slowly. "She must have written it before she ran. She must have meant to send it to your father. But somehow it ended up in Whitfield's possession." "Because she never got to send it," Ruth Ellen said. "Because she ran before she could, or because someone intercepted it." She looked at Lucinda. "Where is Sarah now?" Lucinda shook her head. "No one knows. She disappeared that night. Whitfield told everyone she signed the document and left voluntarily. But this letter proves she never signed anything. She ran because she had no other choice." Ruth Ellen held the letter and the forged document and felt the weight of 20 years of lies pressing down on her shoulders. "She did not leave," Ruth Ellen said slowly. "She ran. She survived. And Whitfield has been holding this land on a lie ever since." She looked at Lucinda. "We need to get these to Theodore Marsh," she said. "Tonight. Before Jonas wakes up and realizes they are gone." Lucinda nodded. "There is one more thing," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Something I found in the same drawer. Something I did not understand until now." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. "It is an address," she said, "in Missouri, written in Sarah's handwriting. I think it might be where her cousin Martha lived." Ruth Ellen took the paper. She looked at the address. She thought about her Aunt Sarah, running through the night 22 years ago, heading for Missouri, heading for a cousin who had promised to take her in. She might still be alive, Ruth Ellen said. Sarah. She might still be out there. Lucinda looked at her. Then maybe, she said, when this is over, you can find her. Theodore Marsh worked through the night. Ruth Ellen stayed with him, watching as he examined the documents, compared signatures, made notes in a cramped handwriting that was almost as hard to read as the faded ink on the transfer document. By dawn, he had everything he needed. The signature is definitely forged, he said. He pushed his spectacles up on his nose and looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. Sarah Hargrove's verified signature uses her full middle name. Every time. The signature on this transfer document does not match. It is not even close. Ruth Ellen looked at the papers spread across his desk. What happens now? Theodore stood and stretched his back. Now I file an injunction, he said. This morning. As soon as the courthouse opens, before Jonas Whitfield has any idea what is coming. I will present the evidence to Judge Harmon Cole when he arrives for the circuit court session on Monday. Judge Cole? Theodore nodded. He rides in from Fort Worth every month. He does not belong to anyone in this county. He cannot be bought and he cannot be bullied. The Whitfields have tried both over the years. It did not work. He looked at Ruth Ellen directly. But I need you to understand something, Miss Hargrove. This is not going to be simple. Jonas Whitfield has resources. He has lawyers from Fort Worth. He has 3 men on the county board who owe him favors. What do I have? Theodore almost smiled. You have the truth, he said. You have documented evidence of fraud. You have a clear chain of family connection to the original homesteader. And you have 8 days of witnessed residence and improvements on the property. He paused. You also have something else. Something that might matter more than any of the legal arguments. What is that? You have this town, Theodore said. Or at least the part of it that has been waiting for someone to stand up to the Whitfields for 20 years. He pulled a small notebook from his drawer and slid it across the desk. I need you to document everything, he said. From the day you arrived until now. Every improvement you made. Every person who helped you. Every conversation you had. Dates, times, names. The more detail, the better. Ruth Ellen took the notebook. It felt light in her hands, but she understood the weight of what it represented. Evidence, she said. Evidence, Theodore agreed. Your residence on that property is your strongest legal claim. Document it, protect it. She spent the rest of that day writing. She sat on the flat rock in the yard, the notebook open on her knee, and she wrote down everything. The day she arrived, the letter she received, the work she did hour by hour, nail by nail, the people who helped her, Ethan Calloway, Billy, Cordelia Hatch, Agnes and Martha Brennan. She wrote until her hand cramped. Then she switched hands and kept writing. By the time the sun started to go down, she had filled 18 pages. Jonas Whitfield came back the next morning. Ruth Ellen was working on the west wall when she heard the riders, multiple horses, moving fast, coming from the east. She did not hide. She did not run. She set down the hammer she had been using and walked to the edge of the yard and waited. There were 4 of them. Jonas Whitfield was in front, on a big gray horse that matched his big gray face. Behind him rode Roy Creighton, the man Ruth Ellen had seen in the cemetery. And behind Roy were 2 others, men with hard faces and guns on their hips. Jonas Whitfield dismounted. He was bigger than Ruth Ellen had imagined from his letters, broader through the chest, harder in the face. He looked at her the way men look at problems they are deciding how to solve. "Miss Hargrove," he said. Her name sounded like something distasteful in his mouth. "Mr. Whitfield, you have something that belongs to me." Ruth Ellen kept her voice level. "I have documents that prove the land you claim to own was obtained through fraud. Those documents are currently in the possession of Theodore Marsh. He filed an injunction this morning." Something moved across Jonas Whitfield's face. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of fear. "Whatever Lucinda told you," he said slowly, "she was lying. Lucinda did not tell me anything." Ruth Ellen held his gaze without flinching. The documents spoke for themselves. "The signature on that transfer is forged. Sarah Hargrove never signed anything, and you have known that for 20 years. Jonas Whitfield stepped closer. He was trying to use his size the way some men did, trying to make her feel small, trying to make her back down. She did not back down. She had stopped letting fear drive a long time ago. "You have no legal standing here," he said. "I have an injunction that says otherwise. And I have a judge arriving Monday who does not belong to anyone. That injunction will not survive the week." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Ruth Ellen said. "Do you?" They stood there, face to face, in the hot morning sun. Ruth Ellen could feel the tension building, could feel the violence that was coiled just beneath the surface. Jonas Whitfield's jaw worked. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. He looked like a man who was used to getting his way through intimidation, and he did not know what to do when it was not working. And then, from the north road, came the sound of hoofbeats. More than one horse, moving at a good pace. Ruth Ellen did not look away from Jonas Whitfield, but she heard Ethan Calloway's voice behind her. "Jonas." The voice was flat and hard. "I think you should leave." Jonas Whitfield's face changed. The calculation behind his eyes shifted. "This is not your business, Calloway. I am making it my business." Ruth Ellen turned then. Ethan was there, on his big roan horse, and beside him was another man, older, maybe 65, with white hair and a weathered face and the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect over decades. "Walter Ashford," Jonas Whitfield said. His voice had changed. There was something underneath it now, something that sounded almost like fear. "What are you doing here?" The old man dismounted slowly. He walked toward the homestead, looking at everything Ruth Ellen had built, every nail she had driven, every board she had set. Then he turned to Jonas Whitfield. "I knew Edward Hargrove," he said. His voice carried easily in the still air. "I was there the night he died." Jonas Whitfield went very still. "I have been carrying that secret for 22 years, Walter Ashford continued. "Because I was afraid of your father. Because I was young and I did not have the courage to speak." He looked at Ruth Ellen. "Your father is dead now," he said to Jonas. "And I am too old to be afraid anymore." Jonas Whitfield looked at the gathered people. At Ruth Ellen, who had not backed down. At Ethan Calloway, who was watching with flat, dangerous eyes. At Walter Ashford, who was ready to tell secrets he had kept for 2 decades. And at his own men, Roy Creighton and the 2 enforcers, who were looking at each other with expressions that suggested they were calculating odds and not liking what they found. Roy Creighton in particular had a strange look on his face. He was looking at Ruth Ellen, then at the homestead, then at Jonas Whitfield. And something in his expression was shifting, like a man who was finally seeing clearly after years of looking through fog. "This is not over," Jonas Whitfield said. "No," Ruth Ellen agreed. "It is not. I will see you in court on Monday." He mounted up. He rode away with his men behind him. and Ruth Ellen stood in her yard and watched them go and did not move until the hoofbeats had faded completely. Then she turned to Walter Ashford. "You were there the night my uncle died?" she said. "What happened?" Walter Ashford looked at her with old, tired eyes. "That is a story for the courtroom," he said, "when everyone can hear it, when it can finally do some good." He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect. "You have built something here, Miss Hargrove," he said. "Something worth protecting. I should have done what you are doing 20 years ago. I did not have the courage then." He mounted his horse. "I have it now." The night before the hearing, Ruth Ellen could not sleep. She sat in the east room of her homestead, her back against the wall, and she thought about everything that had led her here. The journey from Illinois, the letter of rejection, the discovery of her family, the secrets that had been buried for 20 years. She thought about her father, Samuel Hargrove, who had known something was wrong and had been too afraid to find out what. She thought about her Aunt Sarah, who had run into the night and had never been heard from again. She thought about her Uncle Edward, who had built this homestead with his own hands and had died under circumstances that were finally going to be exposed. She thought about what it meant to stand up, to speak the truth, to refuse to be moved. She was afraid. She would not pretend otherwise. Jonas Whitfield had resources and lawyers and men with guns. The county board was full of people who owed him favors. The odds were not in her favor, but she had something else. She had the truth. She had witnesses. She had a community of people who had been waiting for someone to stand. And she had herself. Ruth Ellen Hargrove, 33 years old, built like her father, stubborn like her uncle, standing on land that had always been meant for a Hargrove. She pulled the notebook from her pocket and looked at the pages she had filled. 18 pages of evidence. 18 pages of proof that she had been here, that she had worked, that she had built. She closed the notebook and held it against her chest. Tomorrow, everything would change. The courtroom was packed on Monday morning. Ruth Ellen had expected attention. Theodore had warned her the hearing might draw observers, but she had not expected this. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls. They crowded in the doorway and spilled out onto the steps. Half the town of Brenton had apparently decided that today was a day they needed to witness. She saw faces she recognized. Cordelia Hatch in the third row, with Agnes and Martha beside her. Billy from Ethan's ranch, looking young and nervous in a clean shirt. Silas Pemberton from the general store, who had sold her nails on that first day. And she saw faces she did not recognize. Men and women who had heard what was happening and had come to see it for themselves. People who had their own history with Jonas Whitfield. People who had been waiting, perhaps, for someone else to go first. Jonas Whitfield was already seated at his table. His lawyer was a man from Fort Worth, silver-haired and expensively dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from winning a lot and losing rarely. Ruth Ellen sat down beside Theodore Marsh. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. "All rise," the bailiff called. "The Circuit Court of Brooks County is now in session. The Honorable Harmon Cole presiding." Judge Cole was exactly what Theodore had described. A circuit man, nobody's friend, with a face that suggested he had heard every possible version of every possible argument, and was interested only in the part that was true. He sat down without ceremony and looked at the room. "We will begin," he said. The first hour was legal argument, Theodore laying the foundation, Jonas Whitfield's lawyer challenging it, Judge Cole listening with the patience of a man keeping score. Theodore presented the documents. The forged signature. Sarah's letter. The pattern of fraud that stretched back 22 years. Jonas Whitfield's lawyer argued that the documents were stolen property and inadmissible, that the chain of title was valid on its face, that Ruth Ellen Hargrove had no legal standing. Judge Cole examined the transfer document. He compared it to the verified samples of Sarah's handwriting. He read Sarah's letter 3 times, his face growing more still with each reading. "Counsel," he said to Jonas Whitfield's lawyer, "your client's position is that this transfer was legitimately executed." "Yes, Your Honor." "Then he will not object to testimony regarding the circumstances under which it was obtained." A pause. The Fort Worth lawyer looked at Jonas Whitfield. Something passed between them, quick and unreadable. "We have no objection," the lawyer said carefully. Judge Cole turned to Theodore. "Call your first witness." Theodore stood. "I call Walter Ashford to the stand." The courtroom went quiet. Ruth Ellen watched Walter Ashford rise from his seat and walk to the witness stand with the slow deliberation of an old man who knew exactly what he was about to do and had made his peace with it. He was sworn in. He stated his name for the record. He confirmed that he had known Edward Hargrove. And then Theodore asked the question. "Mr. Ashford, where were you on the night of November 14th, 1861? Walter Ashford looked at Jonas Whitfield. Then he looked at the courtroom. "I was at the Hargrove homestead," he said. "I saw Whitfield's men arrive. I saw them go inside." He paused. "I heard what happened after that." The courtroom erupted. Judge Cole's gavel came down twice before order was restored. "Continue, Mr. Ashford." Walter Ashford took a breath. "I was young then, 19 years old. I worked for Whitfield's father on the side, doing odd jobs. I did not know what they were planning that night. I just knew they wanted me there. They said they needed a witness for some paperwork." His voice went flat. "Edward Hargrove was alive when they arrived. He was not alive when they left. And the next morning, everyone was told it was an accident, a fall from a ladder." He looked directly at Jonas Whitfield. "It was not an accident. I have known that for 22 years, and I have been too afraid to say it until now." The courtroom was silent. Judge Cole was writing something in his notes. His face had gone very still. Then Jonas Whitfield stood up. "This is lies," he said. His voice was shaking with what might have been rage or might have been fear. "Walter Ashford is a bitter old man with a grudge. He is making up stories to destroy my reputation." "Mr. Whitfield," Judge Cole said calmly, "sit down. You will have your opportunity to respond." But Jonas Whitfield did not sit down. He stepped toward the witness stand, his face dark with fury. And then, from the back of the courtroom, another voice spoke. "I was there too." Everyone turned. Roy Crichton was standing, Jonas Whitfield's enforcer, the man who had delivered threats alongside Jonas Whitfield 2 days ago, the man who had worked for the Whitfield family for over 20 years. He walked forward slowly, past the rows of spectators, past Jonas Whitfield's table, until he was standing in front of the judge. "I need to say something, Your Honor." "Roy." Jonas Whitfield's voice was low, dangerous. "Sit down." Roy Crichton looked at him, and something in his face shifted. Something that had been held tight for a long time finally let go. "I am done sitting down," he said. "I have been sitting down for 20 years, watching, keeping quiet, doing what I was told." He turned back to the judge. "I was there that night, too. I was young, 22, working for Whitfield's father. I was told to witness a document. I did not ask questions. I should have. He looked at Ruth Ellen. The signature on that transfer is forged. I watched it being written. Not by Sarah Hargrove. By someone else. A man named Carson who worked for the Whitfields. The courtroom exploded. Judge Cole's gavel came down again and again. Order. Order. When silence finally returned, Judge Cole looked at Roy Creighton. You are prepared to testify to this under oath? Roy Creighton nodded. I have been carrying this for too long, he said. My wife died knowing what I had done. My daughter left and never came back because she could not stand to look at me. I have visited my wife's grave every week for 8 years, and every week I have told her I was sorry, but I never did anything to make it right. He looked at Jonas Whitfield. I am sorry, he said. I have been sorry for a long time. I just did not know how to stop, until now. Then Ruth Ellen Hargrove was called to the stand. She had been afraid of this moment, not of speaking, but of being seen. Of the room looking at her and seeing first what she was before they heard what she said. She sat in the witness chair and looked at Judge Cole and spoke. She told him about coming to Texas, about the letter of rejection, about finding out who she really was and what had happened to her family. She told him about the work she had done, about every nail she had driven, every board she had set, every day she had spent rebuilding what had been left to rot. She pulled the notebook from her pocket. The notebook Theodore had given her, filled with 18 pages of dates and times and names of witnesses. She read from it. Not dramatically, not emotionally. Just the facts. The plain and documented facts of a woman who had been told she was worth 19 words and had decided to prove otherwise. When she finished, she looked at Jonas Whitfield. You tried to take what was never yours to take, she said. You tried to make me disappear the same way your father made my Aunt Sarah disappear. But I am still here. She held up the notebook. And I have documentation. Judge Cole examined the notebook for a long moment. Then he set it down. Miss Hargrove, he said, you have been on this property how long? 12 days as of this morning, Your Honor? And you have been maintaining these records every day? Yes, Your Honor. He looked at Jonas Whitfield, then at Roy Creighton, then at Walter Ashford, then back at the notebook. I have heard enough, he said. The courtroom went silent. The transfer document dated 1862 shows clear irregularities inconsistent with a valid title transfer. Multiple witnesses have testified to fraud in its execution. The signature has been demonstrated to be inconsistent with verified samples. He looked at Jonas Whitfield directly. The chain of title on this property is hereby declared invalid pending federal investigation. All transactions based on this title are frozen. Mr. Whitfield, you will present yourself to this court's jurisdiction for further proceedings within 30 days. He picked up Ruth Ellen's notebook. Furthermore, Miss Hargrove's documented residence and improvements establish her standing as a lawful occupant under the federal homestead provision. She will remain in residence pending the federal title review. He looked at her over his spectacles. Miss Hargrove, keep filling that notebook. Yes, Your Honor, she said. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. 3 months later, Ruth Ellen stood on the finished roof and looked out at her land. The homestead was complete, every wall reinforced, every window installed, every door hanging true on good hinges. The well was working. The garden was planted. The fence posts stood straight and solid along every boundary. She had built all of it. Not alone, not exactly, but she had been the one to start it. She had been the one who stayed when everyone expected her to leave. The federal investigation had moved faster than anyone expected. Theodore Marsh said it was because the evidence was overwhelming, because Roy Creighton's testimony corroborated Walter Ashford's, because the forged signature was undeniable, because Jonas Whitfield's father had left a trail of fraud that stretched back decades, and once someone started pulling on the thread, the whole thing unraveled. Jonas Whitfield had been arrested 6 weeks ago. His property had been seized pending trial. The county board had 3 new members now, elected in a special session after the old ones resigned, rather than face questions about their connections to the Whitfield family. Lucinda had filed for divorce. She was living in Cordelia Hatch's spare room, learning to sew, learning to cook, learning to be someone other than Jonas Whitfield's wife. She came by the homestead sometimes to help with the garden. She was good with plants. She said it was because she had spent so many years learning to be invisible that she had developed a talent for nurturing things that grew quietly. Roy Creighton had left town after the trial. He said he was going to California to find his daughter, to apologize, to try to make things right while he still had time. Ruth Ellen did not know if he would succeed, but she hoped he would. The land where Ruth Ellen stood would officially become hers in 5 years if she maintained residence and continued her improvements. That was what the homestead law required. 5 years of building, 5 years of staying. She was ready for every day of it. She climbed down from the roof as the evening light started to go golden. Ethan Calloway was riding in from the north, the same way he did every evening. His fence line still ran along the north edge of her property. That had not changed. He dismounted at the edge of the yard. "Roof looks good," he said. "It should. I have been working on it for 3 months." He almost smiled. It was rare, that almost smile, but she had learned to recognize it. "There is a letter for you," he said. He reached into his saddlebag. "Theodore asked me to bring it out. Came from Missouri." Ruth Ellen's heart stopped. Missouri. She took the letter with hands that suddenly would not stay steady. She looked at the address, at the handwriting, small and cramped, written by an old woman's hand. She opened it. "Dear Ruth Ellen," it began. "I never thought I would see a Hargrove stand on that land again." Ruth Ellen sat down on the flat rock. She read the letter slowly, letting every word sink in. Sarah Ellen Hargrove was alive. She was 78 years old, living in a small town in Missouri under the name Sarah Monroe, the name she had taken when she married a shopkeeper there 15 years after she fled Texas. She had run from Texas 22 years ago, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a letter she never got to send. She had survived. She had made a new life. She had never forgotten the land she had lost or the family she had left behind. "Your father wrote to me once," the letter said. "About 5 years after I left. He had tracked me down somehow. He asked if I needed anything. I told him I was all right. I told him to take care of his daughter. I did not know then that you would be the one to finally set things right. I am too old to travel now. My husband passed 3 years ago, and my legs do not work the way they used to. But knowing you are there, knowing the land is finally being held by someone who was meant to have it, that is enough. Build something beautiful, Ruth Ellen. The land has been waiting for you." Ruth Ellen folded the letter carefully. She looked up at Ethan, who was watching her with that quiet expression he always had. "My aunt is alive," she said. "I know," he said. "Theodore told me." He sat down on the fence rail. "What are you going to do?" Ruth Ellen thought about it, about everything that had happened, about everything that was still to come. "I am going to write her back," she said. I am going to tell her what I have built, and I am going to invite her to come see it, if she is ever strong enough to travel. She looked at the homestead behind her, at the walls she had raised, the roof she had patched, the home she had created out of nothing but stubbornness and hard work. And then I am going to keep building, she said, because that is what I do. Ethan nodded slowly. 5 years is a long time, he said. It is. He looked at her directly. That fence line of mine still runs right along the north edge of your property. I know. I have been counting on that. They looked at each other. Something passed between them that did not need words. Something that had been building for 3 months. Slowly, steadily, the way good things are built. Well then, he said, I suppose I will see you tomorrow. I suppose you will. He mounted up. He gave her a small nod, that gesture of respect she had come to know, and rode north. Ruth Ellen sat on the flat rock until the stars came out. She held 2 letters in her hands. Her father's letter, which had started everything, and her Aunt Sarah's letter, which had brought it full circle. She thought about burning Jonas Whitfield's rejection letter, the 19 words that had tried to tell her what she was worth. But she had already burned it, weeks ago, in the cook stove that Agnes had fixed. She had watched the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash, and she had felt nothing but relief. That letter was gone. It had no power over her anymore. What she had now was this: a home, a community, a future. And maybe if she was patient, if she kept building, something more. Ruth Ellen Hargrove had come 1,500 miles because she had nowhere better to be. She had stayed because she built somewhere better to be. And for the first time in her 33 years, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The stars came out over Texas, bright and countless. The cottonwood tree rustled in the evening breeze. The homestead stood solid and true against the darkening sky. Tomorrow there would be more work. There was always more work. The garden needed tending. The chicken coop she had been planning needed to be started. The winter would come eventually, and she needed to be ready for it. But tonight, she sat in the cooling air and looked at everything she had built and let herself feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. She had built that too. Nail by nail, day by day. One stubborn decision at a time. And it was going to last. The end.